Hi, good morning, Nigas.
Good morning. Yes.
All right, so we will go through the question number one. Why are standards and training important in encouraging the adoption of ESG?
Okay. So first and foremost, standard is a technical document. So it provides a consistent requirements, and it also can be used as a reference as a best guidance for implementation of ESG in an organization. So in this case, if SME wants to refer to the standards, they can do so lah. And on the part with regards to training, training is the part that tells how part, because standards, they are very descriptive, they are not prescriptive. So during training based on a standard document, we will explain what is the understanding and the implementation of the requirements or the clauses that are stipulated in the standards. So in a nutshell, standards and training, they complement each other. So both of them complement each other so that any organization, doesn't matter whether it's small or multinational, they can carry out the implementation of ESG within their organization successfully lah.
So how can these standards and training benefit the SG?
Okay, so we started early 2022 to come up with this training module for introduction of ESG. So this is like a beginner's kit lah, starter kit for not only for SMEs but any organization or industries who want to know what is ESG all about. So we are still carrying on that training, and aside from that, on the 8th of December last year, Sirim QAS have launched their IQNet SR10, which is they launch it as an ESG document. That means this document is certifiable, but the document copyright belongs to IQNet, and the certification is also from IQNet. So companies who go for IQNet certification, they can export their products overseas lah, to the 37 countries, especially in the EU region, who are members of this IQNet. So IQNet actually basically they are a certificate body association. That means they are CB association. So Sirim QAS being one of the CBs in Malaysia, they are member. And the good news is not only SMEs but any organisation who wants to go for ESG certification based on this standard IQNet SR10, they can get a much more reduced cost rather than directly going to get it overseas lah. So because Sirim QAS is like an agent here, then they will do the pre-assessment, and then once they are satisfied, they will do the pre-assessment on your ESG, and then once they are satisfied that you have complied to all the requirements of the SR10, then they will forward your documents to IQNet to carry out the auditing and approval, and finally the certification by IQNet itself. So it will be quite cheaper lah in that means.
We collaborated with Sirim on, as I mentioned just now, on the ESG management system that we would like to come up with. But other than that, we also would like to see engagement, training on the ESG assessment, workshops. It's not just a normal workshop, but it's a handhold workshops that to make sure that our SMEs really understand what is all about on this on the ESG and what are the minimum requirements that they need to have. We know there's a long list of ESG standards and requirements internationally, but when it comes to SMEs, there must be certain element that they can actually comply with, not the whole list, because that will burden them as well. They will pinch by the big boys, meaning by perhaps the large firms, for example, or even like the multinationals. So I think in terms of talent itself, the SMEs, especially the owner of SMEs need to have a better remuneration scheme, or perhaps in some of tech startup nowadays, they give equity or shares for them to own partly of that company or perhaps that project. So I believe It depends on the so-called owner of the SMEs themselves, and I hope the SMEs will look into the better remuneration scheme for the talent, especially for the young talent, as well as perhaps to give some share or equity for them to own and feel safer when it comes to job security. Well, this is where Malaysia has to focus more on the so-called science and technology education. Yeah? I was informed, or perhaps I understood, that nowadays there are less people taking science as science, technology, and innovation, and engineering in the tertiary courses. Yeah? I think this is where perhaps government and other relevant authorities need to look into this, so that we have enough perhaps engineers or scientists, because when actually you do an engineering course, you learn the ESG part as well. You will not leave the environment, you not leave the social and governance of it, because it's part and parcel of the whole courses itself. So perhaps by having more people, or perhaps graduates, go into science and technology courses, including engineering courses, that will be a great or perhaps extra bonus to Malaysia when it comes to talent and retainment of the talent as well.
Even though the IQNet SR10, the title is on social, but inside the document, aside from social, they also cover the environmental and the governance. So indirectly, if you comply to the requirements of the IQNet SR10, then you indirectly comply to the ESG requirements of that standard lah. So as of now, that is the only standard we have that encompass the ESG until we get our own standard published, maybe sometime middle of this year.
Can you tell us a bit about what is within the SR10 standards? Just
briefly. They have the requirements for the social. That means you have no child labour in terms of working hours, remuneration, and free association and all that. That is on the social part, because the bulk of the document is on social. And then when it comes to environment, they just have one simple clause that says that you need to meet your climate change requirements in terms of GHG emission, in your waste management, and then in your energy efficiency. So that's about all they mention. Very, very simple. It's a very minimum requirement. And then for governance, they say about the board composition, the employees' compensation, and no fraud, no anti-bribery. No fraud, no bribery, and then the whistleblowing policy, ethical, maybe 8 participating. So that's why
4 to 8 for a 1 day session.
Yes.
Okay.
So sometimes they will send maybe 3 per company. So for this training on the 13th, on next Monday, we have 2 from the same company and 1 from another company. So 3 of them participating. So it's quite less, but then we still proceed with the training lah. So maybe through word of mouth, then it might spread.
I understand that it was launched
last year, right?
Yeah. Last January. So from then until now, what are the feedback that you've received so far?
So far they have this wait and see first kind of attitude lah.
Even after attending the
because it's voluntary. As of now, ESG is not mandatory. It's voluntary. So they have this wait and see kind of attitude lah. So they come for the training, then they will go back, then they will see how. So they are not like immediately implementing it, you know.
In your opinion, what do you think they are waiting for?
I think they are waiting for the carrot and the stick. I think most probably they want something mandatory, then they can go full swing and get it done. But I think there's a lot of push factor there, like we mentioned or we talked about, that if they want to get loans, they need to comply with the ESG elements, right?
Yeah.
And then if they want to ensure that they maintain business continuity in the supply chain, then they have to, whether they like it or not, they have to comply.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of time lah, before this one becomes full swing, involved in the drafting of the 14,001. Then the same goes for 9,001 on quality system management. That too can be used as a reference document by organisation who wants to implement some kind of a systematic documentation system within their organisation. So my expertise in the drafting of the standards now will be taken a step higher, whereby I will be interpreting those requirements and putting them into a training module which I can deliver. And since I've been in the committee, I have been participating in the deliberations, so I could be at the forefront to explain, by reading this requirement, this is what you need to do. So it kind of an added advantage that I know how to interpret the standards for me to go into training based on standard documents lah.
And perhaps also you'll be able to sort of explain the thought process as well, right, of the standards. Because I think one of the things that people can't follow or can't adhere to is because they do not understand the thought process of like why a certain standards needs to be in place and stuff like that.
True.
Yeah. Okay. Lastly, are there any other related issues that you wish to highlight?
Okay. Especially since we are talking about SMEs, so what I want to highlight to SMEs, I think they are kind of anxious lah, because of the highlights that been given on ESG and a lot of bombarding with regards of the importance of ESG. I'm sure even for me, if I'm from a small industry, I'll also be anxious. What is this new thing out there? But basically, I think it's nothing new. It's just that for all you know, the SMEs might be practicing whatever we have just talked about in terms of energy efficiency, water efficiency. I'm sure they would have done, because they are in business. I'm sure they are very profit oriented. They will try to cut costs and save money wherever they can, right? So I think it's just that they don't know that these practices that they have been practicing all the while to sustain their business, they might be thinking it's not part and parcel of the ESG, and maybe it's not documented as such. So it's all there. It's just that maybe it's all over the place. So my advice to SMEs is not to be afraid. This is nothing new. It's quite straightforward if you know what it's all about. You just have the process in place. You just have to make it more systematic. So I think they are not basically starting from scratch. They are there. It's just that maybe a little bit gap to fill up and things like that.
Or even just to learn how to report it,
exactly.
It, like you say, so that it translates into other types of benefits.
Because I'm sure they have their board of directors, they have their own policy on how to, in terms of remuneration, bribery, fraud. I'm sure they have somewhere. You can't run a business without that. So these are the essential things. We are not introducing something new, something that they are not aware of. It's the same thing. It's just that they need to make it more documented and more systematic.